Hi guys, hello, welcome to another episode for Lily's Little Life Corner. I'm your host, Lily. I'm realizing this is the first episode in which I am introducing myself. You can tell that I am new at the podcast game. In today's little episode, we're going to be talking about how parents, while raising their kids, can accidentally raise kids who excuse abusive behaviors and red flags. And I touched on this in the previous episode, and this is also going to be a Reddit reading story, and it kind of fits into the previous episode where OP's dad, if you're watching on video and a little thumbs up comes up, just ignore it. It happened in my first episode. I don't know why that happens. I'm using Streamlabs to record my podcast episodes. Always have. I'm so distracted today. I'm so sorry. But let's get into the disclaimers before we get into the story. This might be also a shorter episode because I only have 2 pages of notes. And this is my little script. And of course, if you are a Patreon subscriber, you get access to these scripts and you get to see kind of what I wanted to say versus what I said. And it's only $5 a month for you to get access to this kind of behind the scenes stuff. And so that is my little Patreon reminder. It is in the show notes if you're listening on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, which again, this podcast is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and it'll be available in the YouTube description. On with my usual disclaimers. I am not a psychologist, I'm just a psychology enthusiast, and so I am going to be using my little bits and pieces of knowledge of psychology to kind of talk through this. But of course, if you guys feel that you have something that you want to say, maybe something that I missed, feel free to do so. I always encourage conversation to be happening in the comments. Recently, I got a comment on my Mayo Mom podcast episode saying that the term that I was looking for was vulnerable or covert narcissist in describing Mayo Mom, and I was like, of course, like I absolutely forgot that that was a thing. So if you guys have anything where you're like, Lily, but this and this, you can absolutely say that. I'm not going to get mad at you if you comment that, and I really do appreciate it. So, like I already mentioned, this is a Reddit story. It is on r/am I the asshole, and it was posted 2 months ago, and it was posted by user alive_baker8802. So the title says, "Am I the asshole for kicking my sister out of my wedding because she did not follow the color scheme? When I, 25F, was 9, my parents adopted my sister, Jen, who was 7 at the time. Jen was thin and fearful due to being neglected. We did everything to make her feel loved. We bought her lots of toys. Everything Jen wanted, she got. When my parents asked me to move to the smaller bedroom so Jen could have my room, I was happy to. When they asked if I would let Jen pick the decorations and cake for my upcoming birthday, I agreed. I was so happy to have a sister, and I understood why my parents gave her special treatment. Only the treatment didn't stop. For years, every trip we went on, we had to do what Jen wanted to do. We had to eat where she wanted to eat, and she got to plan all my birthday parties. If she didn't get what she wanted, she threw a tantrum. I still felt loved and cared for by my parents. They drove me to practices, bought me things, cooked meals for me, spent quality time, and gave me advice, but I was always second to Jen. As I got older, I did anything I could to leave the house. I got my first job when I was 12. I vacationed with friends instead of family. I played 3 different sports and did band. I took my driver's test the day I turned 16 and bought a car the day after. I went to college on the other side of the country. Now that I make good money, I do things I missed as a child. I take fancy vacations and throw elaborate parties as I please. My wedding was no exception. My fiancé, Kip, and I wanted everything to be perfect. We thought it would be fun to have a color scheme. My favorite color is yellow and his is blue, so my guests would wear yellow and his would wear blue, and mutual friends would wear green. I picked out a dress with green embroidered details, and he picked out a boutonniere with green flowers. When Jen found out about this, she was mad. I didn't know this, but she hates yellow and it, quote, washes her out. She told me under no circumstances would she wear yellow. I shrugged and said that was fine. I would just kick her out if she did not wear yellow. There was no further discussion, but on my wedding day, Jen came in a purple dress. I told her to leave immediately. The color scheme was perfect and she ruined it. Jen refused to leave until I threatened to call security. The rest of the wedding went smoothly, but afterwards my parents were furious with me for kicking Jen out. I told them that I warned her she would be kicked out if she didn't follow the color scheme, but they said they all thought it was a joke. They said it was cruel of me to kick my sister out over something so trivial. I told them this was my wedding that I threw without their support, so I can kick out whoever I want to. Kip came rushing to defend me and even told my parents they should be ashamed of how they treated me. But over the past few days, a lot of people I've talked to, grandparents, uncles, friends, have been mixed. Some say they wouldn't have even invited Jen if they were me, while others think I should have let it slide. Am I the asshole? As always, I'm going to read the edits and the updates before I give my opinions, just to give you guys the entire context of everything. So OP edits and says, I want to make a few things clear. 1, I figured people would assume this, but I did not ask my guests to dress head to toe in their assigned color. I completely understand that people might not have yellow formal wear laying around. I said to dress in only neutral colors and or your assigned color, so someone could wear a black dress and a yellow jewelry, a black suit and a yellow tie, etc. But no colors outside neutral or your assigned color. 3. Which is not 3, it's number 2, but whatever. 3, I invited Jen because she is family and I honestly thought she was more mature than this. I did not know she hated the color yellow when I chose the color scheme. Update. First, thanks for all your comments. I felt so guilty the past few days and was worried it would carry into my honeymoon, but you have helped me realize that I am not the bad guy and it is okay that I responded the way I did. Last night, my parents reached out to me and asked if all the things Kip said about how they should be ashamed were true. At that point, I told them how my upbringing had impacted me and how my wedding was supposed to make up for the parties I never had as a kid, the decisions I never got to make. For the first time, I was able to call all the shots and make everything exactly the way I wanted it to be. I even showed them this post and how most of you responded to help reinforce what I said. My parents said they had absolutely no idea how deeply their treatment had affected me. This is somewhat fair because I never really talked to them about it, but at the same time, I feel like they should have wondered why I left home as soon as I could. Never came back and hardly ever texted/called them. They said they feel sorry about it and are now planning a vacation with them, myself, and Kip for the next summer to make up for it. I'm trying not to get my hopes up, but at least now it looks like they're making an effort. As for Jen, according to my parents, she really struggled to make friends in middle school and high school. I didn't know this because I practically lived with my high school boyfriend my sophomore/junior year of high school and then graduated early. Jen repeated a year in elementary school due to trauma, so we were 5 grades apart despite only being 2.5 years apart. My parents tried putting her in therapy, but she wouldn't cooperate. College was a slap in the face for her when she realized the world didn't revolve around her. She had to live in the same 7 by 9 foot room with plaster walls and linoleum floors as everyone else. She dropped out after a year and tried getting a job but got fired after a few months. At that point, my parents realized they really fucked up. They told Jen she had to either go to intensive therapy or they would kick her out. According to my parents, she's now taking classes at a community college and hoping to transfer to a 4-year institution. She's doing better for the most part, though she occasionally lashes out. I'm glad Jen is getting the help she needs and working towards a career and excited about potentially going on a trip with my parents and husband, while also knowing they might bail. I'm open to having more of a relationship with them, but I don't think we'll ever be a super tight-knit family. Some wounds are too deep, but instead of dwelling on the past, I'm looking towards my future. Starting a family with Kip and making sure I don't make the same mistakes my parents did. So, first things first, I do have to specify, I do not give a single shit about the color scheme. I know people in the comments are up in arms about, oh, but why would you ever have a color scheme to a wedding? Like, weddings are supposed to be about the people that you invite, not how they look. Weddings are not supposed to be about aesthetics, blah, 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 blah. I don't care about that particularly. I am just going to talk about, the relationship between Jen and OP and their parents. That is it. Nothing about the color scheme. Whatever opinions you guys might have about the color schemes, they're valid, they're your opinions, not your wedding though. So we're not going to talk about that. But okay, first things first. At the beginning, OP says Jen was thin and fearful due to being neglected. And obviously she was adopted. Jen was adopted when Jen was 7 and OP was 9. And I think when parents adopt kids, they're not prepared for the amount of trauma that their adopted kids are going to have. And they're not prepared for how to deal with that trauma. I can see how their thought process process was, well, she was neglected, she hasn't been given anything, so we're going to give her the world. I can see that thought process, but that's not how that works. A lot of traumatized kids, and this has been talked about in different communities, but specifically the communities that adopt kids, the adoptive parents will notice that if a kid has been neglected, they will start hoarding and hiding food. I remember there was a true crime case about a mother who had adopted a kid who had some form of disease where he couldn't eat a lot of salt, and she was convicted of his murder because he ended up dying. But what a lot of people kind of ignored was the fact that he would hoard food that had salt. So even though she was kind of on top of him and observing him, she wasn't in control of where he hid the food, because kids that are neglected and traumatized like this, they will be resourceful, right? They were taught to survive on their own. And so they will be as resourceful as they can be, and they will hide the food in places that you wouldn't even expect them to know was a hiding place, right? And even just if their hiding places weren't that good, the mom was still a working mom. She had other kids to take care of. And so she was tried for his murder because the prosecution painted the picture that she purposefully overfed him salt, but that wasn't the case. It was just that he hoarded food with salt and he overdosed on salt. I listened to this true crime case a long time ago, so I'm not sure if I have the details correct. It might have been that he just on his own overdosed on salt and didn't have a disease where he couldn't absorb salt, but in any case, he overdosed on salt because of the amount of food that he was eating. And so when you are looking into adopting, you really have to take that into consideration. And you really have to understand how their trauma impacts them. Even if they're a little baby, right? If their mother was on drugs while she was pregnant with the baby is still going to have trauma. If the mother was an alcoholic, the baby is still going to have trauma. And you really have to learn how to deal with that and understand that. I personally believe that they really did make a mistake by giving their neglected child a lot of things. Does that make sense? I think they should have eased her into a life that she was now going to have. I think that would have been better for her upbringing if they had told her, you know what, we are going to treat you better than your previous family. We're going to show you love. We're going to show you, all these other things that you never had, but it's going to be fair and just. And I think that should have been the first step, to treat both of their children fairly and justly, because not only is that going to give the kid kind of whiplash, right? You go from a house that does not give you anything at all to a house that gives you everything you could ever possibly think of. That is not a great transition to have, especially if, like, for example, she was in foster care and she was also kind of neglected in foster care, or if she went to a shelter and she was also kind of neglected in the shelter, because obviously foster homes and shelters don't really have the resources to pay attention to one single kid. A lot of the times foster homes, or foster parents, I should say, foster more than one kid at a time. And so she went from not having anything to having everything. Pretty much everything her parents could afford to give her, she had. And that, to me, was the very first mistake that they ever made, because not only, like I said, neglected and traumatized children who weren't given anything when they were growing up, when they do get to a location where they're safe, they start to food hoard, they start to item hoard, right? And they really start to get protective over their things, and they will fight over their things. And even if you tell them, don't worry, I can buy you a new one, they're still going to get angry, they're still going to fight, because they previously did not have anything, and now that they have something that they really cherish, they're going to not let it go. They're scared that someone's going to take it away from them, because that's all they really know, is someone taking things away from them. So again, like I said, I can see why they would do that, but I think that was their very first critical mistake that they made in raising Jen. Not only that, but like OP said, the treatment did not stop. And over the years, like I feel like for the first year, if they sat Jen down and they told her, we are not going to neglect you, we're going to give you all of these things, we're going to make sure that you are taken care of, that would have been fine, right? If the first year she was like, oh, I want this stuffed animal and they bought it for her. Oh, I want this journal and they bought it for her. I want to buy these books and they bought it for her. I want this and this food and they bought it for her. I feel like that would have been fine if they were also doing the same with their biological daughter, but it just continued for years. They didn't change. They didn't use that first year that Jen was with them as a kind of transitionary period. They just continued that behavior. And so OP, for the entire childhood of OP has been pushed to the side. And Jen was told, you have control over what your sister's parties look like. You have control over where we go on vacations. You have control over what we do on vacations. You have control over what we eat. You have control over, and that is where the main issue arises. And that is where not only did they fail OP, but they also failed Jen. Because like later on in the post, OP says, Jen kind of had a reality awakening. She was shown that, oh, you actually cannot control people's decisions. And to me, that's really, really sad, but we're going to get into that later. So throughout Jen's entire childhood, she learned that OP's needs should be thrown to the wayside. OP's needs were not as important as Jen's needs. And OP says, like, right, my parents weren't horrible to me. They didn't neglect me to not neglect Jen. However, they still put Jen first. OP says herself, like, Jen was still first. I was always second to Jen. And that's what Jen learned. She learned that her parents' needs did not matter. Her sister's needs did not matter. Only her needs mattered. That is not the way that you should raise a kid. That's not how you... But let's talk kind of a little bit about how they love bombed Jen. I don't know if you guys are going to agree with me on this, but this is kind of how this particular episode relates to the previous episode. In the previous episode, I talked about how OP's dad was told that he was going to go far places, but he never had, because he was kind of the golden child of the family, OP's dad never had standing or footing to stand on or fall back on when he started a relationship with a very narcissistic woman. And so all of this love and all of this care that OP's dad's parents showed, OP's dad just prepared him for that kind of relationship. And I know I also came to the conclusion that obviously manipulators will manipulate. Very good manipulators will know how to rewire the brain of your child. So even though you teach your child, hey, don't fall into manipulation, these are the red flags that you need to look out for, your child might still fall into a manipulator's hands. And once they do, it's very hard to get out of that cycle. And I came to that conclusion, but I also still believe that because OP's dad was kind of looked up to and he could kind of never really do anything wrong. I mean, he never did anything wrong until he got into a relationship with that woman. He wasn't prepared for that entire life changing that was meeting this, at the time, high school girl. I was under the impression that OP's mom was OP's dad's first love, and so he was able to kind of just fall straight into her trap and manipulate him and change him in the worst ways possible. And now he's avoiding accountability. And there's a third update that I linked in the comments of the YouTube video, but it goes to show that obviously manipulation changes a lot, but there's a very important lesson in the upbringing, which is if you treat your child like the golden child, they're more susceptible to manipulators. They're also susceptible to being manipulators themselves, right? But they're also susceptible to manipulators, which is something that we don't really touch on. We always touch on how the golden child can become a manipulator, but we never touch on how the golden child can become victim of manipulators. And I feel like that is something to look out for right? Because when your child is growing up and they're the golden child, you're doing everything you can to protect them. So if they run into someone who bullies them, you march straight up to the school, you yell at the principal, you yell at the teacher, you tell them, you'd better stop this bully from bullying my golden child. But when they grow up and they kind of move out of your home and they try to start their own lives, they don't have anyone to stand up for them. And because you always stood up for them, they don't know how to stand up for themselves. You always told them, don't worry, I'm going to be here to protect you, but you never taught them how to protect themselves. And I'm not saying also, because I know some people like to take things out of context, I'm not saying also that the parents who raise their children to defend themselves, right? The parents who say, if a bully hits you, hit them back. I'm not saying that that's also good, but I do think as parents, the responsibility falls on you to teach your children how to protect themselves and for you to not be your child's sole protector. Because there will come a point where your child will move out of your house and they will move into the real world and they won't have those skills to defend themselves. They won't have that knowledge to defend themselves. They're going to go around thinking, oh, this is normal, but it's not normal. But let me get to the point that I was trying to make, which is that OP's parents in this post kind of love bombed Jen and prepared Jen for an abusive relationship. This is obviously my opinion, and if you disagree, you can absolutely let me know in the comments. But the way that Jen came from an abusive household and only to be love bombed by someone else, if she ever gets into a relationship with an abusive person and she gets out of that relationship, she's going to seek out someone who love bombs her on the first date. She's going to seek out the person who gives her the most compliments. If the person is like any normal, sane person saying like, oh, like, how are you? What do you like to do for fun? What are your hobbies? What are you studying in college? What are your plans for the future, etc.? Like any normal small talk, she's going to get bored and she's going to think, you don't actually want to get to know me. You're just wasting my time. And she's going to move over to those people who are telling her, you are so beautiful, you're the best thing that could ever happen to me, you're a wonderful person, I can't wait to meet you, I can't wait to marry you, I can't wait to have kids with you, because that's what she was taught. She was taught after you come out of an abusive relationship, you have to seek out these people who love bomb you and shower you with all these compliments because they're the ones who are actually going to take care of you. Like what her parents did. They took her out of an abusive situation and they put her into a situation where she was love bombed, but ultimately she was taken care of, right? She was given a roof over her head, she was given food, she was given love, she was given all these other kinds of things. And that's her foundation on what a relationship is. If you get love bombed at the beginning, you are going to have a very stable family dynamic. Obviously, the family dynamic was not stable for OP, it was only stable for Jen. But the point stands that her parents kind of prepared her for failure. And I mean, we saw this in the update where OP's parents tell OP, like, yeah, we fucked up, and we realized we fucked up because Jen could not stand living in a dorm room because she realized the world does not revolve around her like we taught her. I also want to point out something important, or something to kind of keep in mind, which is that the attention that OP's parents gave OP were the things that parents should do, right? They should take their kids to extracurricular activities if their kids are signed up to extracurricular activities. Obviously, if the kid is a little tiny kid and can't drive, the parents have that obligation to take the kids to school, take the kids to after school activities. Parents kind of have that obligation to give their kids advice, talk to their kids, spend time with them. That's the emotional obligation that you take on as a parent. So these are all things that OP's parents should have done. So it's not anything like remarkable in the context of what a parent should do. However, what the parents did to Jen versus what the parents did to OP, very, very different. Obviously, like OP says, like they still did things for me. They still, put in the effort to talk to me and raise me, but I always was second to Jen. So they gave Jen more attention. They gave Jen more advice. They encouraged Jen more. They talked to Jen a lot more. And we see that in the kind of red flags that OP starts exhibiting whenever she's trying to get out of her parents' house. She starts distancing herself. She starts working overtime, never ever visiting the house. I feel like also OP was one of those kids that wouldn't tell their parents where they were going. They would just go. And it really, really, really surprises me that OP's parents never, or at least not that OP says, never were parents to call up and be like, hey, where are you? Like, what are you doing right now? Why aren't you home? Right? I feel like if OP's parents had done that, and this is like my own personal opinion, OP doesn't expand on this, but in my own personal opinion, I feel like if OP's parents had called her up and been like, hey, why aren't you home? Like, we need you home. We need you home. We need you to be here, etc. OP would have had less of a problem with her parents and more of a problem with what Jen did at the wedding. Does that make sense? Because at least them calling her up and being like, hey, you need to be home right now. You can't be out in the streets where we don't even know where you are, what you're doing. You need to be home right now and we need to see you right now. Would have shown that OP's parents were putting in the effort to keep her home, right? And that's kind of like the first step of getting to know your kids. There's obviously nuances and like sometimes parents who want to keep you home, it doesn't really mean that they want to keep track of you in the good way. It means they want to keep track of you in the bad way, as in like controlling your finances, controlling who you hang out with, etc. However, in this instance, OP says herself, like, I was out and about. I was never at home. That to me is a red flag that OP's parents never were like, hey, you can't go out anymore. Like, why aren't you telling us where you're going? Why aren't you, and again, this isn't like maybe OP did tell her parents, like, I'm going to stay over at my boyfriend's house, or I'm going to spend some time at this friend's house or whatever. And OP's parents were fine with that. Me personally, I would not be fine with that, but case in point, we don't know if OP did tell her parents and her parents were just like, okay, right? But even if OP did tell her parents, hey, I'm going to spend the night at my boyfriend's house, me as a parent, I would be like, the fuck you are, come home right now. I would just, or if I were OP's boyfriend's parents, I'd be like, girl, don't you have a house to stay home at? Like, these are red flags that should have been popping up that OP's parents completely missed out on in favor of paying more attention to Jen, which is crazy to me. It's really, really crazy to me. And that's how we get OP completely giving up on talking to her parents. And I can almost guarantee you that somewhere along the way, and I mean, OP kind of confirms this herself, but somewhere along the way, OP said something maybe a little bit like obscure, a little bit kind of subliminal, or maybe she outright told them like, hey, I don't really want to spend time with you guys. But somewhere along the way, OP mentioned something about how, yeah, I don't really feel comfortable here. And I can almost guarantee you that OP's parents were like, huh, okay, anyway, right? My parents kind of did the same thing to me, where sometimes you don't want to start an argument. You don't want to get into the reasonings. You're so emotionally exhausted. And so you're just kind of an under the table, underhand comment of like, yeah, I prefer spending time away from you guys. And your parents just kind of don't respond to that. And so you're kind of thinking, oh, well, this just reinforces the idea that I need to go. I need to leave. Someday I will talk about the journey that I've been through with my parents, because it's been a really, really long journey. But yeah, when I was 17, I was also trying my darndest to get out of the house and make something of myself, because my parents, I felt, really did not care about what happened to me. And I was also thinking, you know what, I'm gonna go no contact with you guys. If you guys call me, maybe I'll pick up. but if you don't call me, we're never going to have a conversation ever again, right? And I feel like that was kind of OP's mindset of like, if you guys call me, I'll answer, but if you don't, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with not ever speaking to you guys again. And again, these are things that parents should notice and think, this is weird. This is strange that my child wants to spend more time outside than inside. I should address this. I really should. And sometimes, sometimes your kids are just wanting to spend time outside because maybe there's a small town that you live in, right? And there's really nothing to do. And so they prefer to spend time with their friends, kind of just exploring. But at the end of the day, their house is their house and they shouldn't want to sleep elsewhere. At the end of the day, they should want to come home and they should want to sleep in their room, right? They shouldn't want to go to a friend's house and sleep over at a friend's house. They shouldn't want to, spend time with their romantic partner more than spend time at home. That's not how this works. But yeah, I really feel like, especially since how OP says, my parents said they had absolutely no idea how deeply their treatment affected me. This is somewhat fair because I never really talked to them about it. But at the same time, I feel like they should have wondered why I left home as soon as I could, never came back, and hardly ever texted/called them. Yeah. I definitely feel like somewhere along the way, OP was maybe trying to get her parents to sit down and be like, hey, can we have like a talk about how you're treating Jen? And the parents were like, I don't know what you mean. Like, we're just showing her love. She's our daughter, right? I mean, I don't want to say that they like tried to manipulate OP and do all this thing, but I do definitely feel like somewhere along the way OP was like, yeah, we need to sit down and we need to talk. And OP's parents just kind of dismissed that and were like, what? Like, we're not gonna do that, and we're not treating you any differently than we treat Jen. We love you guys both, or something like that. And then they were like, anyway, let's move on, right? If OP did tell her parents kind of what was going on with her and why she didn't want to spend time with them and they ignored her, it's also interesting how the only time that they kind of reflected on their behavior and the only time that they called up OP to apologize was when someone else, a third party, told them the way you raised your kids was really fucked up, right? And that tends to happen with parents who ignore their kids, and who ignore their kids' emotions, is that they don't, if the kid tells them, hey, mom and dad, you really fucked up with raising me, the mom and dad will be like, yeah, whatever. But if someone else comes along and says, oh, you really fucked up your child here, the parents will be like, oh, did we? Oh my gosh, that really wasn't our intent. Like, I told you, you didn't listen to me. You had to listen to someone else, right? And I think, again, OP didn't say like how many times she talked to her parents about this. But once again, like OP said, they never wondered why OP never reached out after she left home. They never wondered why OP was never home. We don't really have the context of if OP talked to her parents and said, I'm going to spend the night at my boyfriend's house, or I'm going to spend the night at my friend's house. We don't have the context of how they replied to that, and we don't have the context of if OP said those things. However, they still should have been asking questions. They definitely still should have been asking questions. It's also very interesting how OP is kind of like, yeah, I'm trying not to get my hopes up because I don't really believe that they're going to show up for this trip. I don't really believe that they're actually that committed to this trip. I think that only goes to show that OP beforehand tried to get her parents to kind of interact with her more. And they said, oh yes, of course, we'll go to your dance recital, or we'll go to your softball game, or we'll go to whatever the case may be, right? And then at the end of the day, they were like, oh, sorry, we can't because Jen had something come up. It wouldn't surprise me if that had happened in OP's childhood, to where OP right now as an adult is saying, I don't really believe that they're going to show up. I'm trying not to get my hopes up. They said they were going to show up, but I'm really not sure. I can't say that they will, I think that's very, very interesting. But anyway, let's get back to Jen. There's two possible outcomes that I see for Jen. There's two possible outcomes that I see with Jen and kids of parents who were raised or who raised their kids like this. One outcome is obviously that they're more susceptible to narcissists and manipulators and abusers because they weren't taught to defend themselves, and every time something happened to them, their parents would come to the rescue, right? So when they leave their parents' kind of protective wings, they're not thinking, what is the best way I can protect myself? They're thinking, I'm just kind of going along, right? If my parents aren't here to tell me that something's wrong, that means nothing is wrong, right? And it's probably mostly subconsciously that people like this are thinking this way, where it's like, well, if my parents don't tell me that this is wrong, it means that nothing is wrong, so I will just continue on with this. It's mostly subconscious thinking. It's just the way that you were raised. That kind of pattern of thought was put into you. So you kind of just go around life not really knowing that your thought process is wrong, but you're doing things or you're allowing things to happen to you that you shouldn't allow to happen to you. The other outcome is that Jen could end up being a narcissist, which is more likely based on the way that we're kind of seeing things, right? And I want to read you guys kind of this article. It is from psychcentral.com. Again, I will have it linked in the show notes and then the YouTube video description, but it's called What Causes Narcissistic Personality Disorder. And the top kind of subtitle says, upbringing and childhood environment may be key factors in what causes NPD, but genetics could play a role too. Obviously, we don't really know Jen's parents' kind of diagnosis, but based off of like the way her biological parents treated her, we can safely assume that her biological parents also had something wrong up here. But let's get into the environmental traits. What are the environmental causes of NPD? It says environmental factors such as culture and parenting could contribute to the development of narcissistic personality disorder. And then right below that, under parenting and NPD, it says, research suggests there's a link between different parenting styles and narcissistic traits in adult children. Still, there's no one parenting behavior that always leads to narcissism. Instead, combinations of parenting styles and other contributing factors like genetics may come together to cause NPD. In general, these parenting factors are connected to higher levels of narcissism in children. Overprotective or helicopter parenting, like I was saying, lack of warmth, setting few limits or boundaries, which is what's kind of also happening with this story. Praise that promotes perfection or unrealistic expectations or over-evaluation. Maltreatment or abuse, which is what Jen came from, and then she went into an environment where it would just set few limits or boundaries and was overprotective / kind of helicopter parenting. Then at the end it says, one study found that overprotection was linked to both vulnerable and grandiose narcissism in young adults. And while too much praise was linked to grandiosity, setting too few boundaries was tied to vulnerable narcissism. Now let's take a look at what vulnerable narcissism is. Vulnerable narcissism is also known as covert narcissism. And this is another article from Psychology Today, which I will also link in the show notes and in the description. But there's a checklist. It says covert narcissism checklist. The more covert form of pathological narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder is not expressed the same way in every individual, but there are typical patterns that are very common. If you see many or most of these attitudes and behaviors in a person, you know you're probably dealing with someone who suffers and makes others suffer with covert narcissism. I'm going to go through the list. It's 52 ways of covert narcissism, but I'm going to kind of go through some of the things that I feel Jen checks off the list. So number 3 is condescending and superior, and number 4 is threatened by honesty and directness. Number 6 denies and dismisses others' feelings. Number 8 identifies as a victim. Number 11 turns your problems into his or her dramas. Number 14 is reactive to questioning or criticism. Number 19 avoids introspection and lacks self-awareness, which we can see this in her avoidance of therapy. Number 23 is envious and vengeful. Number 28 needs reassurance, which we can see OP's parents are more than happy to give Jen reassurance. Sometimes your kids need to not have you to fall back on. They need their own kind of tools to fall back on. They can't fall back on you. You have to let your kids be their own independent self, right? whenever your kid comes to you and they have a problem, you should, instead of saying, don't worry, I'll fix this, you should tell them, what can we do to fix this? Let's think of ideas. Let's brainstorm. What's a good solution for this? And have them think of solutions, right? There's a few other numbers that Jen checks off. Number 38 has an exaggerated sense of entitlement. Number 41 focuses on appearance over substance. And number 49 feels above the rules. Oh, and also number 50 uses guilt and shame to control and punish. So these are already things that should have been red flags to the parents, but were never red flags to the parents, which is really interesting. It's really, really interesting. This reminds me of the parents who have multiple kids, and I'm sure you've seen a TikTok or two of this kind of behavior, but there was recently, like back in May, I want to say, there was recently a mom who was celebrating her oldest daughter's birthday, and the daughter was, I want to say, preteens. I can't remember exactly because it was a while ago, but she was the oldest daughter. I think she was turning 14, and the mom kind of decorated everything up, and if you saw everything decorated, you would say, wow, these parents like really went above and beyond for this oldest daughter. Except for when it came time to blow out the candles, the oldest daughter blew out the candles, right? And that's all fine and normal, that's how it should be. But then the mom relit the candles and had each one of the oldest daughter's siblings blow out the candles too. So some of you might be thinking, oh, but that's just to make the kids feel included. But the thing is, this isn't about the other kids. This is about the kid who's turning whatever age, right? It's different if, for example, me and my brother have a birthday 1 month apart from each other, 1 month and a half apart from each other. We're not 1 month and a half apart from each other, but our birthdays are 1 month and a half from each other. Growing up, our parents would combine our birthdays, right? But also, every time that they combined our birthdays, there was a very clear distinction. Whenever they would get a cake, they would get it half my side, half my brother's side, and we would each get candles for ourselves. I would blow out my candles, he would blow out his candles. He would get blue decorations, I would get pink decorations. He would get one piñata, I would get another piñata. And this was when obviously our parents had more money, and then it kind of went in waves. If they had a little bit more money to spend, our parties would be kind of like that. But even when they had a smaller budget for our parties, my mom would always switch out the candles. She would do, like, if my brother was turning 7 and I was turning 9, she would buy a 7. She would let him blow out those candles. Then she would switch it out, put the 9, make me blow out the candle. So it was never, even though our birthdays were combined, it was never like a case of competition. I never felt that my brother was being valued over me in our birthday parties. Whereas these kind of TikTok parents are very clearly valuing the younger siblings over the oldest daughter or whoever's birthday it is. And that's what OP's parents remind me of. So I'm really curious to know what OP's upbringing was before Jen. Obviously, OP was an only child up until she turned 9 years old. And, you know, she says, like, I was so happy to have a sister. I was so excited to have a sister. But I really wonder what things would have been like if OP had a sibling before Jen, right? Before Jen came into the picture. Or if Jen hadn't been adopted and if Jen had been born into the family. I wonder if OP's parents' treatments would have been different. I guess my main question is, did they treat Jen as the golden child because of her past? Or did they treat Jen as a golden child because that's just who they are, right? Some parents just prefer one kid over the other, and they make it really, really clear that they prefer one kid over the other, such as those TikTok parents that I talked about. That is my main question. I think obviously both are bad, but the first option I feel is very, again, I already kind of talked about this, but I feel like it does a very big disservice to Jen, for Jen's parents to say, oh, because of your past, we're gonna treat you a certain way. Again, it's only setting Jen up for failure. Any way you look at it, OP's parents set Jen up for failure, 100%. And also, speaking of, I really need, I don't know if any of you guys feel this way as well, but as I read the end, I kind of felt like OP's parents were just abandoning Jen. I don't know. Again, this story was brought to my attention thanks to Scaling Stories on TikTok. And when I watched the TikTok and when I was kind of listening through, I kind of thought, it's really fucked up that Jen's parents made her be this person. They made her have this sort of whiplash when she went into college and realized, oh, the world doesn't revolve around me, right? Because that's how they taught her. They taught her the world absolutely revolves around you. But when she went to college and she realized my parents lied to me, the parents kind of abandoned Jen. I don't know if abandon is the right word, and I hope you guys kind of understand what I'm trying to say, but I definitely think OP's parents should take more accountability than what they are right now. I think it's their fault she's this way. Any way you cut it, it's their fault that she's this way. Let me go back and read the exact wording. They told Jen she had to either go to intensive therapy or they would kick her out. Yeah, sometimes you do have to put that kind of boundary. But I think, dude, there were so many red flags that they should not have ignored. For example, the red flag of Jen really struggled to make friends in middle school and high school. And then her getting fired and her not being able to live in the same dorm room. They should have intervened sooner. They set her up for a failure. I really do feel like. Obviously, Jen is an adult now, and I'm glad that she's going to intensive therapy, or at least I think she's going to intensive therapy, but the parents need to go to therapy too, because obviously, they walked up to OP and they said, how dare you kick your sister out? All right. Oh, we thought it was just a joke. We thought you were joking that you were going to kick Jen out if she didn't wear yellow. Really? You really don't know your biological daughter, do you? But you're also still supporting and standing behind Jen's temper tantrums. You also need to go to therapy. They should have been in therapy a long time ago. They should have been in therapy when Jen was first adopted. And I understand, right? It's hard to get kids to cooperate. However, that doesn't then mean, oh, well, therapy didn't work for us. Oh, well. It means try again, right? If your child is not cooperating in therapy, you have to wonder why. What happened? How can I get my child to open up? We really, really need this child to go to therapy because she's been abused her whole life up until now. We really need her to talk about it. We really need her to understand that we're going to treat her better. We really need her to trust us. We need to understand her story so that we don't trigger her, most importantly, because like I said, there are very small things that can absolutely trigger the absolute fuck out of people. Like I said in my previous podcast episode, even a compliment, a well-meaning compliment that you pulled out from the bottom of your heart can absolutely trigger someone who has been abused. So the fact that, it says my parents tried putting her in therapy, but she wouldn't cooperate. That gives me the idea that when she wouldn't cooperate, they just pulled her out and said, oh, well, right? I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you guys think OP's parents tried many different therapists? I do feel like they failed Jen. I really, really do. That is my main kind of opinion on this. I feel like they really failed Jen, and I feel like they should hold themselves accountable for that. And family therapy might help. It's never too late for family therapy. Because also, imagine being Jen for a second. Put yourself in Jen's shoes for just a bit. Imagine your whole life, ever since you were pulled out of an abusive situation, right? You were born, you were put into an abusive situation, you were pulled out of that situation. And ever since then, you have been given anything you could ever wish for, except for when you get to college and you realize, oh, this isn't how the world works. And then suddenly your parents are telling you, yeah, we're not going to treat you the way we've been treating you. It's like an instant switch you're going to be really confused because you're going to be thinking, but I thought this was love. This is what you told me, that me getting anything and everything I ever wanted was love. That was care. That was what I should aspire to. That was what I needed. That was what I wanted. And now you're telling me that you messed up in raising me. You messed up in showing me love. How do you mess up in showing someone love? How do you mess up in raising someone? Like, what do you mean you're gonna kick me out? I thought I kind of ruled here. You can't kick me out. You love me. If you kick me out, that means you don't love me. Why would you kick me out? I think family therapy would really, really help. Family therapy with at least OP's parents and Jen. And then that way they can tell her, you know what? I'm sorry. We thought we raised you well, but it turns out we made a lot of mistakes and we really set you up for failure, and we're really, really sorry. We really are. And you have to know that this is not what love is normally. We love you, and that's why we gave you things, but this isn't what love is normally. If someone treats you like this, it's a bit of a red flag. I mean, I don't know if they're gonna tell her that, but I think they should. I think they should tell her, don't expect people to love bomb you, because a lot of people who truly do love you are not going to act the way that we acted. We just weren't prepared to take on a child with the amount of trauma that you had, and we're really, really sorry that we failed you. We're really, really sorry that we set you up for failure. We're really, really sorry that we set you up for failure, and we hope you forgive us, and we hope you continue attending these therapy sessions with us so that we can learn together and we can learn what love is and what love should look like and what healthy love should look like. But anyway, I'm gonna go through some of the comments that some people were commenting. So the first comment is by Art Shapiro, and they said, info, why was she even invited to your wedding? You apparently have every reason in the world to resent how you always were treated more poorly than she. I'm sympathetic to your story. It's a bit surprising that you'd want her anywhere near the event. And that was kind of the sentiment of all of the comments that were saying, like, you're the asshole. Is like, why would you even invite her? If you knew that she was like this, why would you invite her? But OP replies to that herself saying, I thought she would be more mature than this. I never thought that she would show up with purple to my yellow themed wedding. Like, that was the last thing I could have ever possibly predicted to become an outcome. Like, I was never in the house. I never realized that she was more fucked up than, what I thought she was. I thought my parents were taking good care of her. Like, OP wasn't even there, really, when Jen started kind of exhibiting these problems in middle school, high school, college. She wasn't there. She doesn't know that Jen is kind of entitled, right? So I personally don't blame OP for that. There's another comment by Blue Rose 1197, which says, when my parents got married, their colors were blue and yellow. They didn't ask guests to wear those colors, but the whole wedding party did, except my mom's stepmother. Stepmom showed up in purple. As I'm typing this, I find it crazy that the colors are the same, even though my parents were married 45 years ago. They still talk and joke about how stepmom showed up in the wrong color and she's been gone for 10 plus years. Granted, that isn't the only thing they still make fun of her about, but it's the only one with pictures as proof. OP's adopted sister is going to be the same as my stepmother, who was hated by everyone, even her own biological kids, if she doesn't shape up and realize the world doesn't revolve around her. And this was in reply to Stormy 111161, which says, not the asshole. I've been to weddings where the bride and groom wanted a color scheme. To date, I have not known of anyone who had such a problem. They showed up in a different color just for spite. Because make no mistake about it, that is exactly why your sister showed up in purple. Pure spite. If the color yellow was really the problem, she could have asked to wear blue. Instead, she showed up in purple with the express intention of upstaging the bride and groom, causing a scene, knowing all the time that your parents would back her up. Your parents have been shitty to you ever since your sister showed up. Time to call them and your sister out for their obnoxious behavior and blatant favoritism. Yeah. So anyway, like I said, this really does remind me of the previous episode where OP's dad was raised with this belief that he could never do anything wrong, and he could never, be apart from family. He could never do something so wrong that his family would leave him. Except for he did. He backed a woman who was hateful and so mean to OP's dad's family. And when they told him, hey, this is hurtful, he didn't back down. He just continued. He kept doing what he was doing. And it's like I said, people who are raised with this belief that they can never do anything wrong, not only are they susceptible to becoming manipulators, but they're also susceptible to becoming victims of manipulators. Last week's episode was what happens when you don't intervene. And this episode, I'm hoping, is what happens when you do intervene. And I'm hoping that Jen is able to turn herself around and is able to see that, what she was taught was not good. It was not good. It wasn't true. She was taught that the world revolves around her. That's not true. The world does not, in fact, revolve around one single person. And I hope OP's parents also learn that they really, really fucked up. And I really hope they also go to therapy and they also put themselves in therapy and realize their mistakes and apologize for their mistakes and do better. And I hope after that they are able to, or OP is able to comfortably tell her parents, you can be grandparents to my children. Because right now, from what it's looking like, OP is not wanting her parents to interact with more kids, right? She said, I don't want to do the same mistakes that my parents did. I want to, do everything opposite of my parents. But again, like I said with the last episode, it's important for OP to go down this pipeline and kind of ask her parents, why? Why did you do this? If I had a younger sibling who wasn't traumatized, who wasn't, neglected, would you still treat them with favoritism? Did you have a problem with me? Or was it that you neglected me so much because Jen was neglected and you wanted to overcompensate for that? I really think it's important for OP to ask those questions, maybe in family therapy, and really understand where her parents came from. Because, like I said in my last episode, sometimes there's things that your parents taught you to think that you don't realize, oh, my parents taught me to think this way. You just think this is normal, this is how everyone thinks. And at a certain point in time, you will get confronted for these thought processes. You will get confronted with your kind of wrong idea of how the world works. But I think it's important to catch it before that happens, if that makes sense. I think it's important to understand I have this thought process and I know it's wrong and therefore I'm working on correcting it, than being 50 and being told by either your children or someone else, a third party, being told, hey, this is not how the world works. And then you having to work to overcome 50 years of thinking a certain way, right? I think it's easier to work on it when you're younger and work on it before you have children. And it's like I said in my previous episode, it could be the smallest things. The smallest things can lead you down the most dangerous pipelines, such as just believing that you have to be nice to people. Believing that you have to be nice to people can lead you down being in love with a manipulator and changing your entire self. And suddenly you're not nice to everyone because your manipulator taught you that you shouldn't be nice to everyone. Does that make sense? But yeah, I think it's really important for OP to ask her parents those questions. Those would you have treated me any differently if Jen had not been abused? Or did you only treat me differently because you were trying to overcompensate for Jen? Did you feel guilty? Did you feel like you owed Jen more than me? Did you feel like I would be fine? Did you feel, and just ask tough questions. Just really get to the bottom of why her parents did what they did. And hopefully they're able to work it out. Hopefully they're able to forgive each other. I mean, OP and Jen kind of forgive each other and talk things out. Maybe not forgive each other, because OP, from what we see, didn't really do anything to Jen, but I think they should go to family therapy is what I'm trying to say. But anyway, that is all that I have for this podcast episode. Again, let me know what you guys think. Do you guys agree with what I'm saying? Do you disagree with what I'm saying? If you're watching on YouTube, definitely comment. If you're watching on Spotify, you can also comment. Or listening on Spotify, you can also comment. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next podcast episode. Just a reminder that my Patreon is up and you get behind the scenes kind of content. I'm trying to get also some bloopers up because this episode and the past episode have been chock full of bloopers. So I'll get those up soon. And yeah, anyway. Thank you for watching, and I will see you guys in my next episode. Bye.